Hi, I'm Todd Langley, the CEO of Crisis Response Leader Training, CRLT, and we have had an outstanding weekend at the Advanced Law Enforcement Rapid Response Training Annual Conference at the ALERRT down in Nashville, Tennessee. And we have met some extremely experienced and talented individuals throughout our experiences here this weekend. And we decided that this would be an excellent opportunity to also do some podcasting to share some of our experiences with each other as well as with our viewers so that we can continue to put out that message about how we can make our community safer, particularly for incident response when it comes to something like an active shooter incident that may happen inside of your small community. So with that, I would like to introduce our guest for this episode, and I'm joined by Joel. So Joel, if you don't mind saying hello and just telling us a little bit about yourself and your background.
All right, my name's Joel Lofton. I'm currently serving as the Director of Safety, Compliance, and Response for Walthall County School District in Mississippi. In addition to that, I serve as a mayor in a small town close to Walthall County, which is Sumrall. Have a little bit of background in law enforcement and education. I've crossed back and forth between the two for most of my career, and have found ALERRT to be a vital program in all aspects of what I do. I'm glad to be here with you today to talk a little about ALERRT training and about your program and products and how they can be put to use in my situations.
Well, and I appreciate that, and I'll tell you from what I got to know from Joel before we came on the air, it's extremely impressive, and I think a lot of people will relate to your background and your history because you've certainly held a lot of different responsibilities and you've had to do them simultaneously. So you've really stepped up for civic responsibility, in my opinion. I would say thanks for that. I certainly know what it means to have to work extremely hard at more than one job at one time. But you did relate that you have been in some public education. You were also in an elected position, and you've also been on the responder side. And did you also say you had done some EMT work as well?
Yes. Early in my career, I served as an EMT and then went into education as a teacher, certified administrator of the state of Mississippi. Following that, I did several years as law enforcement. And I say following, my students, when we do the kind of get to know you day in class, they think that I'm about 80. Because I actually have about 20 years experience as a law enforcement officer. I have 25 years experience in the classroom as a teacher, instructor at the college level, or administrator. When they start adding those up, they say there's no way you've done all of that. But I have to explain to them most of the time in our part of the world as an officer or as a responder, you don't work just one job. Unfortunately, we have a lot of teachers also that don't work just one job. So though I have 20 years experience as an officer, or a little over 20 now, and I have 25 as teacher, most of those were stacked right on top of one another. So I've served as an EMT, teacher, administrator, law enforcement officer, and now serving as mayor. Had a short stint in law enforcement with the Mississippi Office of Homeland Security, where I worked extensively with grants and funding for public agencies. And that also ties into ALERRT and how we can get out and prepare for the day that we hope and pray never comes to our area.
But we should be prepared for it. And I think unique for you is how many different perspectives you're able to pull from based around the idea of public safety, right? So you can think about it from what it means of the teacher with children, but also the faculty person responsible for the emergency action plan, and you can understand what it means from a couple of different perspectives of the first responders on the scene.
Absolutely. You know, I thought I had a good handle on this as a younger officer when I was first trained in the ALERRT protocols for response. As a teacher, as an officer, I understood both sides. I'll tell you another factor that's very important is when I became a dad. That even throws another factor in that you have to understand the parental point of view, not only as a teacher needing to know what will those officers do if we have a critical incident where there is mass casualty event occurring on my campus. What are the responders doing and what is my role? We have to train teachers about that. Then also as an officer, what is my role if this event's going on at the school? How do I stop the hurt? what do we do? What's the most efficient and effective way to get in and make these things happen? But then as a parent, you get a whole different point of view in that a third component to any event is you've got these parents who are coming to their children. Those are their babies, and they're going to be on scene. So this is a whole different point of management. I had heard often about, well, you need a reunification point, you need to set up boundaries. As a parent, I found how truly necessary those were.
And stressful too.
Yes,
right?
and stressful.
Yeah.
And stressful. I know that the day after my son was born, we were in the hospital. My wife asked me to walk down the hall to the cafeteria and pick up some food and bring back to the room. What they had brought in was not quite to her pleasing. So as I left, I went, and I was coming back with a little snack, and the fire alarm in the hospital went off. And this was when it really occurred to me that things had changed. My wife was in there, and I would have gone to her, but security showed up in the hall and said, "Sir, you can't enter." I said, "Sir, you can't stop me." I said, "I'm going back there. I've got my wife and a day-old child. You're not stopping me." It changes your mindset when you're a parent, and parents think the same thing when bad events happen at school. You're not stopping them from getting there unless you have a thorough and well-planned
you got to demonstrate that
situation.
confidence to them so
Yes.
that they know that you have the best interests of their children.
Absolutely.
That you're doing everything you can to make them safe and get them united as quickly as possible while allowing the responders to do what they need to do at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that's a great segue, because I think I'm going to, and what we try to do in our series while we're here at ALERRT and in the future is we've just staged a moment in time of a typical phase of a response. So this would be what we call the rescue task force portion of the response. So I'm going to show Joel that setup. I'm going to talk to him a little bit about what has really occurred. And it's going to be really unique, because I'm going to say, what are the different perspectives and questions and concerns you have? And because of Joel's background in many different things, we're going to learn a lot in a short period of time. But I'm just going to show Joel and the viewers what we have set up on the scene. So here we are within the CRLT, the incident simulation. That simulation is designed to support foundational level training of first responders at the tactical level, to give them common terminology, to understand the fundamentals of ALERRT. And then it goes into the specifics of what do I do if I'm the incident commander. So that is about the requesting and staging of assets that are needed to do the overall scene. And then certainly it also goes in to be able to understand support capabilities in a multi-jurisdictional or multi-agency response of what's called unified command, but also community outreach. So how do I show my faculty? How do I maybe make my teachers more aware? How do I get parents more involved and supportive of what we have for our emergency action plan? So that's the design of the simulation. It is also programmed in a way to make it replacing tabletop exercises, which is commonly used across disaster preparedness and training drills. So it should be in mechanics familiar to most of the training audiences that we are trying to provide for. We've started with active shooters because we feel that that is one of the most crucial things that needs to be addressed within our society right now. And we want to get as many people on here as we can so that we can build better, efficient, coordinated responses so we can save as many lives as possible. So that's the CRLT, the incident simulation. And I'm just going to briefly show it to everyone so you know where we're at. Essentially what we had is we had a report of an active shooter at a middle school. There was one suspect. There was a school resource officer on the scene, somebody that was armed. There were reports of gunshots and multiple injuries. And the school resource officer, after about 30 seconds, reported that he was able to put the suspect into an initial custody. So from that, we had additional people that responded to the call from dispatch. We have a couple of other officers that are immediately securing the area around the suspect. So one is reported in the hallway, looking down the hallway. The other one is checking out the classrooms near where the shooter is at. So we think we have 3 total officers inside the school at this point. In the scene where you're looking at right in the middle, as I rotate it around a little bit, you'll see centered right in the middle is an officer holding a pistol. We've got an officer to the side of him, which is got more a protective equipment on. That, you can see he's got a helmet on, he's got a rifle, and then we've got 4 fire and rescue, and they have got with them a mass casualty bag. So in that overall scene, you can see, that we've got them staged on the side of the school, and here's our initial response that came into the side. So you can see the overall, we're talking a fairly decent sized school. It's pretty big. But we'll zoom back in there to their actual location. And give you, so this is some of that reporting we're hearing. Here's that suspect that is in custody. And I see I've got some wounded already in that area, the weapon off to the side. And then this is the hallway leading out. Copy. And here are my people that are staged. So I'm just going to hold it back there, and we're really not going to control or say anything. It's just off of this right now. We're getting ready to do what we call the rescue task force. We're staging the medical branch for different things. So this is probably like a little bit of, we're getting ready to do triage. So from all of that, Joel, what are some of the different perspectives and questions, concerns you would have in your community for if something like this happened?
Well, I'll say this, in the community, both where I serve the school district and a few miles away where I serve as mayor, this is a rescue task force that we're just not going to see. If you look statistically at the majority of fire agencies and law enforcement agencies across the United States, you've got about 15 or fewer officers in roughly 80 to 85% of the agencies across our nation. Granted, we've got many agencies in the country in major metropolitan areas where you run into hundreds and thousands of officers on staff, but the vast majority of agencies you see in the United States are 15 or fewer officers. Far more of them. So the likelihood of having one school resource officer and 4 officers show up on scene, that's something that would be very unusual within the first 15 to 30 minutes of an incident. For instance, in the areas that I'm familiar working, you would probably have at most 2 or 3. Of course, mutual aid would result in additional officers arriving very quickly. But our initial response often in these rural jurisdictions is extremely limited. There are normally only a small number of officers on. Obviously, if you're covering a town or a county 24/7 and you have a complete staff of 15, you're going to be extremely limited. Additionally, with fire here, we see 3 firemen showing up to help with that rescue task force. That's also somewhere similar percentage. You've got about 85% of fire agencies across the United States are volunteers. So these are people in your community that put down their work, respond with whatever gear they have. And we've done much better in recent years through the work of ALERRT and through the work of other national agencies to integrate between law enforcement and fire and to bring those fire responders in a little bit earlier. But we still run up against a great deal of policy issues where we have departments who will not enter as a rescue task force due to policy. Some of those policies are outdated, but I'll tell you another thing with the rescue task force, these firemen that are responding need some special training and special equipment. And that's something that is happening now. It's becoming more popular and more available, but it has not reached many of those rural agencies. So what I see here is something that can be worked with, but in our situation where I am, this is what I would call an absolute best case scenario. Mm-hmm. This would happen on training day. If everyone was in for training that day and a call came out, you might see this kind of response, but I would even say on training day,
this would be your textbook unlikely. Of this is what right looks like. Now, right. Let's deal with the reality. And I think what you bring up that I think is, that's why I love getting a chance to meet with you, Joel, is because what would you do? You would have to rely upon a lot of volunteer cooperation. And how do you get that together in a community where, you got to do some type of training? How would you do that? How would you handle that?
Well, one resource that we utilize that we have with our school district are our own personnel. We know that within a school we have limited resources coming, so we take extra effort to put into equipping and training our personnel to meet the medical needs of students in a traumatic event. And of course, right now we're not training them to go out and handle active threats. But when that threat subsides, we know that it will be some time before responders can enter the scene. So we've equipped in my school district each school with trauma kits, and we are training a volunteer team on each campus. We have what we've identified as an emergency response team for each campus, and we're providing them training on how to deal with specific trauma to students so that we can self-sustain, because that's really what we have to look at doing as an agency, as a police officer with a small agency, knowing at best there would be 2 of you in an incident like this. You had to plan how to deal with the incident as a 2-man team. For these educators who are part of these volunteer teams on campuses, they have to understand that they have to operate on their own until help arrives. And that's an important thing. Help is coming. We know that. But we know, because of where we choose to live and where we choose to work, we've chosen that life. And we're a little further away from those professional resources that larger cities have. Our response time is a little bit longer, but we trade a lot of things to have that. We're willing to drive distances to work. We're willing to drive distances to shop. That's what we've chosen to do, but in return, we also know that help's a little further away. Yeah. So we have to be able to self-sustain, and that's the thing that's important as law enforcement. We taught that. I was involved with ALERRT training in our state for quite a number of years, and still do a bit of training. It's important for our officers to know when bad things are happening, you are the one with the opportunity to make a difference. And it may not be a great day for you, but if it's 1 of you or if it's 2 of you, our responsibility is for those kids and those teachers. The parents have entrusted their children to us as law enforcement who protect the schools, as law enforcement who protect the community. Those parents have entrusted the lives of their kids. And when you take on the badge, you take on the responsibility and that trust to go out and do what you have to. So we try to prepare to handle things without a lot of help for a time. And that's what we always try to emphasize, whether it's with our fire service, our law enforcement, or our educators. We try to get in a position to be self-sustaining.
You know, I would have asked you, as a follow-up, what would be the one thing you'd want to drive home with the viewers, but I think you couldn't have said it more clear right there. And it's about the requirement you have to be prepared for the immediate issue as it happens until help arrives. And I think that first 10 to 15 minutes is absolutely critical. And it could be certain things of individual skills of moving and communicating and being able to medicate or sustain victims until help arrives. It can also be leadership skills of how am I gaining accountability? Where are my rally points at? What am I going to do for shelter or evacuate for other issues other than active shooter, and especially if it's inclement weather? And then what am I going to do with my traffic control plan and, with family members coming in? What does that mean to on-site and off-site family unification? And all of those things, I think in a training environment for preparedness, things will change as the situation actually occurs.
Absolutely.
But we should have a training plan in place based on a baseline plan that everybody's aware of. We've trained to that as a standard, and then that allows us what I call branch or sequel. It is a contingency that we don't, necessarily it's not part of our baseline plan, but because we've trained on the baseline plan so much, we're able to adapt. And I think we got to have both. We have to have that training plan and preparedness, but we have to be able to adapt and be resilient to that, which is another ALERRT message that we are talking a lot about this weekend. We've got to have a combination of both. And even in our rural areas, that message has got to come across, and we got to be prepared for that. So, it was a first show for you for the simulation. We use that as a backdrop for just some quick, discussion on your background experiences. And it was a pleasure to meet you. It was an outstanding opportunity for me to learn about what it means to you and your community, and what it means when you've got a limited amount of resources and you still have a daunting task ahead. So I can't thank you enough for spending some time with us this morning.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was a good time.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
easy. That was awesome.
Well, thank you.
That was probably it. That was
That was the
amazing.
best one we've had.
Good job, Joel.